Awesome. Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai, haere mai o te committee apati mo te mahiri o rauhi e tēnei rā. Welcome everyone to today's District Plan Subcommittee meeting. The emergency procedures are on the screen, although everyone in this room is fairly familiar with them. We'll move on to the opening formalities. Mea karakia tātou. Tui e te mana aki, rāra rangahira te mana rangatira. Kia tipu, kia puawai, e ripu nā wai o te awa kairangi. He kai te aki ki te whenua, he oranga taio, he oranga tangata, homi e hui e tai ki e. I've received an apology from Mayor Laban. Do we have any other apologies or any early departure? I'd like to move that the apology received from Mayor Laban be accepted and leave of absence granted. Do I have a seconder? Yeah, Tony. And now put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. All opposed? Declare that carried. Moving on to public comment, we have one member of the public who's here to speak with us today. Ken Jackson, please join us at the head table. You know the drill, you've got 3 minutes to speak, and if you can leave some time within that for questions, although granted there's no one else here, I'll be a bit flexible with the rules. And I understand you're speaking on item 5, which is our submission. Kia ora, Ken.
Okay, all right, I appreciate the opportunity to speak here today. Right, I'd like to speak here today on the proposed district plan and some of the governance around implementing the rules in decision making. I'll give you an example of why we have some serious concerns on this process through a resource consent application we've just been through. Back in October 2025, only 9 properties on the Coast Road were notified of a large-scale clean fill that involves 36 truck movements through Wainyamata per day, 5 days per week, which will dump nearly 200,000 cubic metres of clean fill onto a known floodplain for the next 30 years. Every area of this application has needed a huge amount of mitigation to make it seem like it will have a minor effect on the environment and the local community. There are many inaccuracies in the application on traffic safety, dust, noise, flooding, sediment release, etc., etc. But with the applicant investing so much into so many experts with evidence that it gives the illusion that it will have little to no effect. This in itself tells you it's an unsuitable site for the scale of activity alone. It is my understanding that with the new national policy statement for hazard risk, there would be no possibility on this happening on a floodplain in the future. We believe that the process has been very unreasonable for the affected parties for the following reasons. The applicant has been working with Hutt City Council since 2022 on this application. There was no communication with the community or affected parties prior to the application being lodged. Greater Wellington Regional Council approved their part of the consent in August. It was a non-compliant activity, which was done as non-notified. There was insufficient hydrology information at that stage for Greater Wellington Regional Council to make a call on the notification type. I contacted Greater Wellington Regional Council about the consent and asked how we could challenge the notification decision. They stated that we couldn't. I have since found out that we can challenge it through the Ombudsman. In late September, only 9 properties were notified of the clean fill application. This is a very small selection of the many truly affected people and groups for an operation of this scale. It should have been fully notified or at least expanded to include the following: all Coast Road residents, the school bus service, the local schools, the many other schools and groups that visit the forest parks, etc. Rural Post, Waste Care Rubbish Service, the local iwi, Fish and Game, the village businesses, rest home providers that have vans coming out there regularly, New Zealand Cycleways, Golf Club, Berring Head Reserve, and possibly the main road, Wainyamata Road, Moon Street and Wise Street. These are all going to be affected by the trucks. In the conditions, it states that from 1044 Coast Road North, he needs to provide everyone with the information prior to the starting of the clean fill operation. This surely shows that more people will be affected. We've had a large meeting of very concerned residents and groups. Written submissions were done by November to the private commissioner who was appointed by Hutt City Council. The hearing with the private commissioner was on the 15th and 16th of December 2025. That decision was granted on the 2nd of February 2026. The reasons why we believe the process has been unreasonable, undemocratic is as follows. The timeframes were very rushed during a council election, just before Christmas, and then councillors were directed not to communicate with us even though a private commissioner was appointed. Who can we talk to if we can't talk to our elected councillors? Isn't that the main purpose of the councillors? We had very little time to raise funds and get expert opinions, of which most of those that we approached had a conflict of interest with the applicant. If you read through all the paperwork or listen to the hearing, it becomes very apparent that Hutt City Council and the council experts are very aligned with the applicant. Even the private commissioner gets employed by Hutt City Council and the applicant pays that bill indirectly through Hutt City Council.
Cool. We have gone over time, so if you could wrap it up with any particular thoughts.
I'm the only speaker here today. I've got another page, I think.
Yeah, I'll give you another minute. But
okay. Yep.
Any points particularly relevant to the submission to the government would be really useful.
Basically, we were thrown to the wolves. I approached a local resident, Anania Randall, that owns a Māori block just 600 metres below the property with a proposed clean fill. The river runs right through his 1044 Coast Road and then down through Anania's land. Anania had sent Hutt City Council and others his concerns, especially that he was personally not notified as a Māori landowner. I would have thought that it would have been a priority for the local iwi to be involved, especially with the concerns of the sediment that will almost certainly enter into the waterways during high rainfall events. This seems very unusual to overlook this. My family have farmed next door to this property since the 1850s, and I can assure you that the proposed clean fill area definitely floods, and the coast road is unsafe for this amount of trucks. There have been many complaints against the applicant for unconsented earthworks over the last 3 or so years, which includes a massive amount of river works. There has been a few warnings, but no actual enforcements. I asked the question why. The applicant has probably done more earthworks in 3 years than the rest of the Coast Road residents have done in 10 years combined. We are not against a reasonable amount of earthworks that everyone should have the right to do. There needs to be a review of the process that we have just experienced, and we need to preserve the Coast Road for its true value, outdoor recreation and tourism. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you for taking the time to come in and speak with us. Did you have any thoughts on the actual submission that we're making today to the government?
Yeah, I agree with parts of it. I do support the compensation for land or things as well, which I'm not quite sure where the council stands on that. Subject to it being affordable, I guess, for the council, but
that is one of the decisions that we do have to make, is what is our position on it. But as someone that I know would be affected probably on both sides, there is a possibility it could be hundreds of millions of dollars that our ratepayers need to fund to compensate.
Yeah, but that's only if they are identified. So that would be up to council, I would have thought, to limit their identifying that land. or going back to what I've said in the past is look for voluntary type things, which I've tried to actually drive through the council in the past.
So out of interest, would you support voluntary if there was compensation?
Well, we went through a whole process with the outstanding landscapes and the SNAs, and it was basically a land grab, so I was very against it in its form. I tried to persuade the council to look at a voluntary incentivised system, which just over the time really got ignored. I probably would have already put areas in. Don't know, I'd have to rethink that a little bit.
And obviously submissions are open until tomorrow as well, so if you did want to make your own personal submission as well, that's totally fine. Cool, did any other members have any questions? Cool, Councillor Lewis?
Thank you, Ken. Yes, I hear all your concerns of that process, which has now gone sadly, and that was just the process of the time. But we are going through a whole different time with local government, and as the chair has said, if you've got time, the government is the one to, highlight anything that you think in our submission is going to assist the public. If you can pull something out that is relevant and get a submission, and that would be fantastic.
Yep.
And our MP is the master of all of this, so get in touch with him as well.
Yeah, I'll certainly look at that.
So apologies, no questions.
Is there an opportunity for us as residents, community, to speak to the council on our issue that we've just been through, the process?
We'll let officers come back to you. It's not a decision that council, and particularly the subcommittee, has any involvement with on resource consents. It's done by an independent commission operating under the RMA, not operating under council. But I'll let officers come back to you if there is any opportunity.
Yeah, well, I mean, it'd be nice for, I would have thought councillors were here to support the community. And this is a community issue, not just a few NIMBYs.
Yep.
This is quite a serious thing.
Yep,
and
no, absolutely.
The process has been it feels corrupt. I'm going to say the word, but it feels like that.
I understand
and it is something, I know it's not quite here for this meeting here today, but we've had no opportunity to talk to anyone. I asked to speak to some councillors during the time we were going through our submission. We were told we couldn't. I don't understand why we couldn't. There was a private commissioner, and that's become apparent that even yourself on the Manor Park thing now, you're commenting online, taking in people's opinions. We couldn't even do that. And there was a private commissioner, so it doesn't seem right. Something's not right.
We'll let officers come back to you.
It needs to be reviewed. So how do we go about getting this process reviewed?
We'll get our planning team to come back to you with when is the appropriate time.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ken. Cool. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us, Ken.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. I've got a little thing here that I could...
Yeah, if you just pop it over on the table there, we'll grab it, and if it's your submission, we'll add it into the minutes when they go out.
Yeah, that be shared about. It's sort of on the Maori land side of it.
Okay, cool. Yeah, if it's not the submission, then we'll just circulate it with the members.
Yeah.
Kia ora. Thank you, Ken. Any conflicts of interest to clear? No? Great. Before we move on to the submission itself, while we make our way to page 2 of the supplementary agenda, I just want to take a quick moment to acknowledge the passing of John Terrace last week. Our condolences to Katie and the wider whānau during this tough time. And please know that our thoughts here at Hutt City Council and the wider city are indeed with you. The next full council meeting, the Mayor will further acknowledge John's service to Te Awakarangi Kitai and Aotearoa, but given this is the first meeting of Hutt City Council since his passing, I did want to acknowledge it. Cool, so we'll now move to page 2 of our supplementary agenda and ask Stephen Davis, our Senior Policy Planner, who has had a very busy summer, to please speak to this item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is that coming through? Yep. I'll take the report itself and the draft submission as read. I do think there's a few things worth expanding on just at the start, though. This is the second attempt at a complete replacement of the planning system in 3 years. As with the last one, it's unpredictable. We don't know what's going to happen. There's a lot of change that could still potentially come, and the whole thing could still fall over. So we're not going to provide you now with a complete briefing on all the impacts it's going to have on council, of which there will probably be quite a lot. There's tentatively a briefing scheduled for the 2nd of July for the full council on what the impacts of the Planning Bill and Natural Environment Bill will be, and by then they should be much more locked in. They will have been through their select committee process. There's 2 different bills that are going to replace the RMA, the Planning Bill and the Natural Environment Bill. The Planning Bill is the key one for Hutt City and other TAs, so the submission focuses on that. The draft doesn't go into much detail and doesn't look at any of the detailed clauses of the Natural Environment Bill, which is almost entirely implemented by the Regional Council. If you have, I guess, more detailed concerns with the Natural Environment Bill, that's why there's the option there to support the Regional Council's submission, because they put a lot more work into the impacts that would have on them. And there's a lot in the Planning Bill. The submission and this report have tried to drill in on what are both the key operational concerns for the council and what we thought would be likely to be politically options that the council takes a political interest in having a view on. For those political ones, they're inherently political, so we're not making a recommendation. We do have the complicated sort of choose your own adventure structure for the report because we do have to submit it tomorrow, so there's some pre-written options for you to choose between. It doesn't limit you in picking those, but it will help us get the thing in by the end of the day tomorrow to, again, focus on a few key things and not have to write a lot in a short period of time. And again, because it's a political decision, you need to be explicit in making a decision as a committee about what you're instructing us to do. We did have some points that Councillor Mitchell sent around before the meeting. The structure of the planning bill is very much to leave those sorts of decisions about how you decide what notable trees are and what is in significant natural area and so on. Those are all set in national direction that the planning bill provides for, even more so than the RMA. It empowers central government to make those sorts of decisions without putting them firmly into legislation. That's so fundamental to the scheme, I don't think there's any point in submitting on it. Changing that and trying to provide more certainty around those sort of things in the planning bill would be completely rewriting it from scratch. To that figure of hundreds of millions of dollars, that is a worst case, and that would be, I think, through a court challenge to the Council on Environment Court. But the issue is that the bill, while it's a worst case, it's not necessarily that likely, the bill doesn't rule it out. So it is, I think, important for the council to have some more certainty about what the worst case is so that we can be prepared for it. For Mr. Jackson's points, in terms of how relevant they are to the submission, I think the main thing is that, like the RMA, the process for deciding who gets notified on a resource consent is set out in the planning bill. The government's intention is to make that test a lot tougher so that people are much less likely to be notified under the new scheme than they are under the RMA. Regardless of which way the council might support that, I don't think I recommend submitting on it because the government seems pretty set on it. It's, I think, a driving force for them in deciding to go this way on the whole structure of the planning bill. And so while it's open to you to submit and ask that the, if you wanted to do that, to submit to ask that the notification test be made more liberal, then I think it would risk detracting from the other points made in the submission. Yeah. So, are there any questions?
Cool. Thank you so much, Stephen. Thanks for addressing Ken's points, because that was exactly the question I had. Would it weaken the argument? And we know this is one of the number one reasons why and how these RME changes have been pushed through. Cool. We'll keep it high level initially, and then I think we'll go through some more detailed questions around the options in front of us. Did anyone have any questions so far? Noting we haven't all seen, well, I've seen it, but Andy's, Councillor Mitchell's additional comments, but as you say, they're a bit detailed to include at this stage. And I think sort of the high level things that he touches on around compensation is already well covered within our, I think there probably is an opportunity to maybe just add an extra sentence or two to the area around the resourcing. I think he does make some good points there around making sure we're resourcing the ministry and the transition costs. I think would be worth including just a little bit extra there. I think he does make a couple of good points there. So any questions? Councillor Tapu.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for that. I guess the main one question I've got just around the compensation scheme is looking at those options that have been provided in the paper. I'm interested to see whether or not there's a possibility we have an option D, ED I think it is, which is around advocating to the government to actually provide the fund. So if we're talking about compensation and compensating owners, and we understand the financial impacts of that for us as a council, could we put in there an option that the central government actually provides that stream, that funding mechanism for us, if we were to get to those situations, as you mentioned, in the environmental court?
Yes, so the draft submission advocates under all of those options that central government should provide the funds for the compensation scheme in those situations where council is forced to impose a rule because of central government direction. It'd be open to you to advocate that the central government provide the funds in more situations or all situations if you want. Leave it up to your judgment about how likely you are to get purchased with that request.
I think with the ongoing conversation around rates capping, it's definitely worth keeping it in there. So it's paragraph 45. It says, to the extent that the regulatory relief scheme compensates landowners for advancing goals set by central government should pay for it. So I'm more than comfortable keeping that in there under whichever options. Before we get into the options in too much detail, does anyone have any sort of high-level questions? And then I think we'll just go through each of the chunks each. I'll put forward what I'm kind of thinking, take a bit of a stare, have a bit of a chat, ask some questions, and then we'll move on to the next one. Councillor Stalin.
I wouldn't really say it's a high-level one, but it's more of a specific question. Just in the recommendations, it talks about requiring regional spatial plans to reflect long-term plans rather than the other way around. I didn't quite understand the logic of that, so if I could hear a bit more about that, please.
Sure. I think it's not necessarily a definite risk, but something worth keeping in mind is that the structure that the planning bill sets up is that councils would need to implement the regional spatial plans in their long-term plan decision-making. The risk that I think we should be worried about is that when preparing the regional spatial plan, it might have something that Hutt City Council would need to pay for as one of the regionally significant items that the council might not have supported when the regional spatial plan was developed but got outvoted. But we would still be the responsible TA for funding and providing, and then you'd be in an awkward situation of having this duty to provide for it in the long-term plan when that's very much not what the council had wanted to do. I don't think it's that likely that you'd end up with a legal challenge where the council was forced to pay for a project it didn't want to, but I think it would make the planning a lot more awkward and the relationship with other councils a lot more awkward to be able to be put in that position.
Just a comment then on that, if I can now, if appropriate. Yeah, thanks for that. I understand the issue there. It just does seem to me it's back to front if you're doing you're coming up with a plan for the region, but yet we're saying, oh, we'll do these individual plans by location first, and that's going to describe what the plan for the whole region is. So, I mean, my preferences would be that we make the point that you've raised, which is a very valid one, and perhaps if we had some thoughts on how that might be mitigated, I don't know. I don't really like the way it's expressed there, Chair.
Yeah, I read it first and kind of was like, it does seem back to front. Then I kind of pictured it the other way around, and I'm kind of like, that doesn't work either. So I think maybe the point is we try and make that there's a real disconnect between the regional plans and long-term plans, which are the two, or will become the two main documents that we operate under. Yeah, whether it's something in our long-term plans that's just pooling funds as a region to do whatever the region decides are the top 5 projects we do, and we all are contributing, which is largely how Te Ākiwai is going to end up. Yeah, at the moment, long-term plans are every 3 years. If that gets pushed to 4, it could be even more of a disconnect. So I totally get the points Councillor Stan is making, because I had the same thoughts as well. So I wonder whether we say, rather than explicitly it should be the other way around, maybe just talk more about there needs to be a really good connection between those two, and then explain the rationale for why it would work around the other way. because I think the points prior to that line saying it should be around the other way, I think all those points are very valid. So I think keeping that in there. So I think just a little bit of wordsmithing on that would be good.
Sure.
Cool. Any other questions? Cool. Councillor Pokatapu, Councillor Lewis.
Just in regard to reusing existing technical work, page 15, point B. You know, all the work we did in relation to spatial planning with the regional work that was done with all the councils. Do we know if that's going to be fed into this proposed new system? Or will we be reusing or redoing it, all of that? Just seems a waste of time. Do you know what's going to happen?
We don't have, I guess, enough to know for sure. I think it's likely that the regional spatial plans will draw on previous regional work through the future development strategy and other regional planning work, as every previous round is drawn on every round before it. There's nothing in the planning bill that says for sure what that structure is. There's the possibility for national direction to set very strict requirements and limits on how they're developed, but it's not in there to comment on at the moment. So there's nothing much we can do in a submission about it.
John's got something to add to that.
Through you, Chair. Thanks, Councillor. So the Senior Officers Group met yesterday around the regional spatial plan, and whilst there is quite a deal of uncertainty, it's clear that there will need to be one. So we're in the early stages of what that might look like and starting to scope out that work so that when direction comes through, when the bill gets passed in whatever form, we are ready to go. So.
Councillor Pokatapu.
Sorry, my mind's just sort of jumping ahead past this whole, what happens past this legislation and all this. I'm just thinking about secondary legislation as well, and whether we're thinking about looking at the detail of some of the legislations that might sit behind the planning legislation, because I guess sometimes the devil is in those details as well, which is quite important for us. So just, have we got a positioning at the moment as a council on the secondary or follow-up work that's happening behind for planning and environmental?
Yeah, so the planning bill sets out, I guess, two broad different ways there can be secondary legislation around there. There's the possibility for regulations, as within almost all statutes. Those are designed to set out a lot of the sort of procedural things like when you're doing a resource consent, when does the clock start and stop, which is one of the issues we raised in the draft submission. I think the council generally won't have an ability to have any input on those. There's a fairly set procedure for coming up with them that doesn't involve public comment generally. The second is the much more powerful system of national directions, so the national standards, the national policy instruments that come in through there. Those come with a guaranteed public participation process, a minimum 20 working day submission period, which is, I guess, actually slightly stronger than what the RMA provides for at the moment. So whenever those come up, whenever those get notified, we keep an eye on that and identify some submission opportunities and either make them as officers or bring them to council as appropriate. We don't know, I guess, when they're going to happen. The government's going to move at its own pace, but we're here waiting for them to happen, and they'll be brought to council when we get the opportunity. There'll be a lot, I think, to give feedback on in the first round of national direction under this scheme, which sets a lot of the things, even the ones that are set in the body of the RMA at the moment, are now sort of just decisions for the government of the day. So I'm sure the council will want to submit on a lot of what's in that first round.
Cool. Councillor Salinger, and then after this we'll go through the options and then we'll cover off any other questions that come out of that aren't covered through the options presented.
I don't mind asking my question then because it relates to the options. Or I could. No, okay.
Just say there'll be another opportunity after we go through the options to ask any more questions.
Great. That's very helpful. Thanks. I made a note here in relation to options, particularly the high-level one, which is whether we support or oppose the reforms as a whole or remain neutral. And I found it very interesting, our officer's comment in relation to possibly making a submission relevant to notifications, and that may be seen as, really an opposition to what the government's direction, and that could be taken as a reason for not mentioning it. I don't know whether it's an overriding reason not to mention something we're concerned about, but it just haven't heard it expressed that way before. So I think that I found that very interesting. I had some thoughts along those lines on different matters in here, and just one of the main ones was whether we endorse the two other submissions. I found there's quite a different tone in the submission from GW compared to Taituara. Yep. The former being one which mentioned it supported certain things, and the other seemed to be just saying this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, and this is with very good comments, I thought, but nevertheless, if I was the governor, my feeling from what I must confess was only fairly quick reads through those submissions in the time I've had to spend on this to date. But so I had that same kind of thought. If we were to endorse those and take them essentially as like our submissions, whether that may kind of lessen the impact of the key concerns we felt most important, because we just had this, bang, 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 these 100-odd pages of things we don't like. People on the side who are trying to push this agenda may just kind of go, hang on, this is just a bit too much for us to take on board. So, sorry, taking a long time to get to a question. What I was interested in was any further comments from the officers in relation to that option, in relation to whether we support or oppose. Recognise it's a political decision, but interested to know what the officers thought would be the best approach for us, and their own genuine thoughts as to whether, the whole thing was, don't want to exaggerate, a bit of a disaster waiting to happen, or there were some good things likely to come from it.
I don't think it's a hugely significant decision one way or the other. With a submission process like this, there are going to be thousands of submissions from probably the majority of councils. I know some aren't actually submitting, but councils are going to submit in general. Civil society organisations are going to submit, Mana Whenua are going to submit. There are going to be thousands of individuals submitting. Having an impact in this is, in my experience, in one of two ways. Either you make an individual point that whichever humble MFE staffer is reading your submission thinks, oh, that's a great idea, we'll do that. Or the sort of strength in numbers, MPs think, oh, well, all of the councils are really opposed to this thing, maybe we should think twice. The points we've made, generally at a high level, are going to be that sort of second category strength in numbers, so they're going to have an impact because lots of councils are making them. And so supporting other people's submissions is getting in that school of thought, trying to come across as presenting united front and giving more weight to each other's points and seeming like councils are on the same page as each other. So it's a political decision about whether you feel like you are on the same page as them. Then for those individual points, again, that's, I guess, where it's key to drill on the ones where you've got a particular point of view and you can make your case really well and it stands on its own as a point that someone can just read and say, oh yeah, that's good, we'll do that. So it depends really just how much you agree with where Taituara and the Regional Council or anyone else's submission you want to endorse is compared to the views you have. I don't think it's a hugely significant decision, so I wouldn't lose sleep over it.
That's very helpful, thanks. Just to my other point I tried to make in that long, somewhat of a question I asked. Do the officers have a view as to whether the reforms are generally heading in the right direction but need a lot of tweaking and modification, or whether they see this as having so many problems that we really it would have been better to start again or not proceed?
I don't think you'd like this answer. It is, I think, a pretty fundamentally political question about things like the balance between development and the environment and the role of the amount of community participation in the process. They're not things with a technically correct answer. They're not things with such an operational impact that the council can't do it one way or can't do it the other way. It is fundamentally judgment about what the state's role should be and what the council's role should be. in the entire issue of resource management. So that's why we're not, on these issues, not presenting recommendations, because they're political questions.
Through you, Chair. Thanks, Councillor. So we'll implement whatever legislation, whatever guidelines come out. We're just presenting, as we see it, the opportunities and challenges with what's being proposed. So yeah, we'll still, whatever comes out of this, we will obviously head down that track and implement, but just providing the options with the risks and opportunities that lie behind it for you to make a call on what goes in that final submission.
Great. So I think we'll go through each of the options, which are on start on page 10 of the supplementary. Just noting, I think, sorry, 2 seconds. Yeah, I think the A numbering, I think, is a bit out of whack with what's actually in the submission. So let's go with what the actual options are in the paper, and I'm sure you work out the intent from the wording. For option A, I'm happy to put forward option A3, which is actually the text A1. I won't read it, it's there in front of us, page 12, option A1 text, A3 in the paper. That is that we broadly support reform, but we do think there's some significant practical issues with the implementation that we wish to call to attention. Does anyone have any thoughts or opposing opinions on this one? Or maybe we could come back to this one after all the other conversations, but Councillor Puketop.
I think it's about, for me, it's about in principle. There's a big issue here in regards to the impacts on Te Tiriti o Waitangi and on sites of significance for Māori. It's limiting Māori mana whenua involvement at that legislative perspective, which I know, and I've heard, I know that we have our own documents in place that put those relationships in place, and we will continue anyway. But it's about the principle of Te Tiriti o Waitangi for me. So there is, I mean, I agree that there needs to be some reforms, but notwithstanding the fact that there are some significant major challenges for Māori, fundamental challenges here that we've got, noting, of course, that reform does need to happen. Hence why the question I was asking about secondary legislation, because there's those opportunities there for us when we're working with Māori to really have a think about the detail a bit more. So I agree with that, but I think it's just adding a little bit more in the sense of agree in principle, noting the issues, the bigger issues here.
Anybody have any other views around not going with agrees in principle, but we have some concerns?
I'd support that approach, but picking up on the concerns raised, I think we need to be clear in the concerns relating to Te Tiriti and any other concerns we have, which are there quite a few, that they expressed very clearly, which I think they are in the submission.
Yeah, and like it's unfortunate that there is a list of concerns that I think are all very important. That it does seem like a big list of things, but they are all very important that we do need to collect them all. Cool, so happy for A3, but the wording of A1? I'm assuming you know what we mean. Yep.
Yes, sorry, I did mess up the number because we did reorder the issues a couple of times.
Cool. I'll go off the paper, so if there's any others that
take options off the paper.
Then you'll understand what we mean. Cool. Under option B, I was going to put forward B1, which is voicing our support for the GDub and Taituara submission, particularly the GDub one, I think, given they're a neighbouring council and have a lot of overlap with our jurisdiction. But more importantly, they make the points around erosion of the treaty much more in depth than we do in ours. So I think rather than us repeating a lot of what they say, I think endorsing what they've said as well as what we've got in there, I think is good. And as officers say, strength in numbers is good for this, particularly. They've got quite a different focus, but quite a lot of overlap with us. Less concerned about the Taituara one, but do in principle agree with a lot of the points they have made as well. So I'm happy to put forward B1, but keen to hear if anyone else has any opposing thoughts.
Just stewing it over in my mind, I might agree with you on that one. I just, as I expressed earlier, didn't feel entirely comfortable with the tone, just for the kind of reasons we've talked about. It doesn't really come across as saying anything positive, but I'm bearing in mind that it's a long report and I went through it very quickly given its length. Yeah, so not entirely comfortable with including that one, but I'll probably go along with it if that's the majority view.
If it's the majority view, you'll definitely go along with it. Did anyone have any other opposing views on whether we endorse these two? Cool. I will add like a little disclaimer though with the GW one. Obviously, they haven't formalised their final submission. Their meeting is today. So if it was to vastly change from where the draft currently is, then maybe we'll rework this, but that can be picked up in that extra recommendation we've got between myself and the team to tweak the wording. If they were to add in some crazy clauses in there that we absolutely don't agree with, then we'll work through that. So B1, which is voicing our support. Option C, putting in advocating for the stronger treaty clauses. Option C1. Did anyone have any thoughts on this? Yep.
I'm just thinking about this option, and it's less about the option, but more about maybe thinking about the submission itself. The big legislation, I think the government practices so far around the Treaty of Waitangi is that there's likelihood this will continue anyway. So I think for me, this is an and option that we should be absolutely supporting this, but I'm interested also to understand when we go through the levers, what are the levers within the planning bill that are there for Māori that we might be able to be a little bit more descriptive about within the submission itself. So it's and then also thinking about how we can put into the submission that whether or not we have an opportunity to talk about the primary and the secondary legislation that our submission is speaking to, in case there are those opportunities there. So it's a question and a support, and.
So do you want me to answer that, Mr. Chair? So the treaty clause, I think the key advantage for mana whenua there is giving you an opportunity to challenge decisions in court as being inconsistent with the treaty. And then the option D, we're talking about the tools like delegations of power and joint management agreements. Council doesn't currently use any of those, but those provide a formal process for Māori involvement in actually developing plans that then later stages have to give weight to. So those would be, I guess, come earlier in the piece and not necessarily have to go to court to underpin those things. Again, nothing in the planning bill rules out council itself continuing to take a stronger partnership approach with mana whenua as it likes. It's just about the status of those decisions once they leave council's hands and go off to commissioners or the court.
Sorry, one more question. I guess my thinking is around, and it's a comment you made earlier, these strengths and submissions and that are the same, but also these strengths and individual points that are being made. So whether, just in regards to the submission itself, those key descriptors that we're talking about, like what you've just mentioned in option D, so that we are giving policy writers options about description, because I think as opposed to sort of more generic, giving effect to Te Reti o Waitangi, is the and opportunity that I think I'm talking to in regards to our submission.
Any other thoughts on these ones? Yeah. Happy to talk about C and D because they kind of are hand in hand. So
Yeah,
also
I
going to
think
support
that's what I was
advocating
going
for
to say
retaining
as
the tools.
well. To support option C and advocating for stronger treaty clause and advocate for retaining the tools as well. So if they can be combined, that would be great. I mean, we submitted strongly against the principles, Bill, and, you know, that's gonna have, we have to follow through with this and this submission as well.
And one other thought I've been kind of having is I know it's just a matter of the timing and the awkwardness of how quickly this has all been rushed through, which is another concern. That it would have been great to have endorsed mana whenua partners with their submissions, because I know they are also making submissions, but just as a matter of process, we can't see their submissions because they're not finalised, so we can't really endorse something we haven't seen, but in principle, obviously, we support our mana whenua partners, so it's probably not something we can put in there, I think, just given we haven't seen it, but yeah, that's more of a matter of process and how quickly this has all been pushed through. Any other thoughts on C1 and D1? Great, move over the page to options E. At this stage, I'll put forward E2, which is supporting the compensation scheme while giving feedback on the technical issues. The main one being, like, if the government's going to tell us to do stuff, the government should be paying for it, which is, like I say, one of the last lines in paragraph 45. I almost wonder whether that should be up front, because my support and the compensation is purely based on that. Like, I am a believer that if the public is taking something for public good, then the public should be paying for it. But if the government is telling us we have to do something, and then we are doing the thing we are being told we have to do, why are we then having to fund the things that we have no control over? So I think maybe that point from 45 could be a bit more upfront under this category. But yeah, the other one is that we just sort of don't express an overall view on this one, but still give the feedback. But I think in principle, like I said, I would support compensation scheme, but all of the points we make under there are all very important to it succeeding. Any other thoughts, Tony?
Yeah, I was thinking the same way, although the points made are very important, and without those being addressed, you know, it's just could be disastrous, you know. So I'll just point out, I didn't raise it as any conflict or anything like that, but I've made some public statements in the past in relation to consideration of financial compensation in respect of certain regulatory decisions, particularly connected with heritage, but not solely that. And I guess where I see perhaps a differentiation is general rules which may affect what someone can do in their property, and rules which are designed to restrict what happens on a property because others want to enjoy looking at it, or something similar. And that's the kind of area where I think needs to at least be consideration given to compensation of some magnitude. So that's what's behind my support for your recommendation there.
Yeah, for me, there's just so much unknown with how this scheme could work. Like with the removal of the amenity clauses from it, could a landowner seek compensation because something was built next to them that was ugly, and a property valuer goes, oh, well, the 6-story concrete wall on your boundary has dropped your value by X amount. Go talk to the council, they'll pay you from their flush pockets. So I did initially question, so thank you for acknowledging it in the start, Stephen. When I first read that hundreds of millions of dollars thing, I was like, oh, that feels a bit blown out of water. But when you think about it, that's 1,000 houses with a couple of $100,000 of lost revenue. We also don't know what other things will come in the future. Will it include natural hazards if we start talking about coastal retreat, and are we on the hook for those? Like, it's just a big shopping list, and if it's not really clear who's paying, how it's assessed, it could be, yeah, quite a hard thing to deal with. I think maybe for this one, we support it up front, outline all our concerns, and then maybe at the end we say something along the lines like, unless all of these concerns are kind of agreed to, then it's going to be a very problematic scheme. Like, in principle, I support it, but I can just see so many weird little fish hooks that, yeah, there's no case law or any precedent as to how these things will work. And all it would take is for a new government to come in with a different NPS, national policy statement, on anything, and all of a sudden this scheme would get triggered, which could, yeah, see our ratepayers on the hooks for hundreds of millions of dollars. So is everyone kind of comfortable with that? It's kind of a halfway point between supporting and being on the fence. Because I think, yeah, all the points are very valid. Cool. Were there any other thoughts about the submission more widely? That's kind of the key ones that officer have asked us to take a steer. Have I missed any other areas you wanted to take a steer from, or are they purely the ones that have been pulled out as recommendations?
Those are the things we thought it was likely you'd want to take a stance on. We can put anything else in the submission as well if there's anything else about the planning bill you'd like to express an interest in. I mean, those 5 options are really just us trying to predict what your key issues of concern are going to be. Obviously, we've got limited time tomorrow, so we will be working with the chair to finalise the wording. So we can write a bit more and put it in if there's a topic, but you need to have a very specific idea about what it is you want to put in. Is probably the main constraint.
Thanks, Stephen.
Or take something out if you want.
Was just thinking back to our public comment by Mr. Jackson and the suggestion by the officer that might be a bit undermining if we raised that concern in our submission. I don't really know how I feel about that. I don't see that as an overriding rule not to discuss it or address it, but something to take into account. Having said that, I'm not sure my own views on the extent of opening up notifications to a wider audience. I'm not sure my own views about narrowing it down as is proposed, but I suppose I'm interested if any other members had comments on that and whether we should at least have some discussion on whether we want to address it or not.
Yeah, I think if we were going to include something, and this is what I've been thinking about since Ken's submission, is this comes up all the time, like as Ken mentioned, Manor Park's another live issue right now. Through the previous changes, they've already narrowed who is a notified party through the notification process, and it's going even narrower with what's being proposed. It still always falls back on, it's the council making these decisions, when in fact, it's the RMA that's dictating who is a notified party, that's all in law. It's not like a council, it's not our decision as to who's notified. I think it might be worth maybe including a paragraph around not necessarily disagreeing or agreeing with the direction, but making the point that this is just another thing that makes the council look like they are the one that's doing. It's the council that's decided to do SNAs, or it's the council that's decided to do outstanding natural features. No, it's the RMA that's told us we have to do it. It's the legislation of this country that tells us we have to do it, not us just deciding, oh, let's go off and do this thing or heritage or any of the regulatory takings. Aren't us deciding to do it, it's the law telling us to do it. So with these, who's notified being even narrow, I think does pose a risk of further sort of negative thoughts of the council that we are deciding, actually, no, this issue, even less people are concerned about this issue now. Tui.
Yeah, they're all good thoughts, and just in line with Ken's comment and in what we're doing with now, and then if you bring in this compensation, it'll be good to know a process. Say if this rule goes through and the compensation with technical, I don't know, if it's all explained for compensation, the government does it, and something happens at the land that the submitters have said this is going to happen, but they were ignored with that coast road, do they get compensated? Would they? Which law comes into place if the whole place floods? Yeah, it's just, the whole process just seems a bit, but by removing people to give warnings to council and to, rule makers, what is there? And is there compensation for ignoring the the warnings that came from the public, people like Ken that know what happens with the river? Will they get compensated? Do we know what will happen? The rule's not set yet.
I'll share this question. The compensation regime that the planning bill sets out is solely for impacts on people's land that are caused by rules imposed by the council on that land. The compensation scheme doesn't cover any impact on someone's property value from what somebody else might be able to do on their property, or from the impacts of council not having acted to restrict something that it might or should have acted on. It's solely what you can't do on your property because of a rule the council's imposed.
Does it have a carve out for what a neighbouring property could do on their property, like the example I said of removing the amenity? Would there be the argument, well, there's some loss of, value to a property next to a 12-storey concrete wall, no glass facade, all the,
Yeah, there's no obligation in the planning bill for the council to provide any sort of regulatory relief in that situation. The council could choose to have a policy of trying to compensate people for that, but it's not obliged to by the planning bill. It's only a limit on what you can do on your property from a rule.
any other thoughts?
Sorry, just a question. Ignore my greenness in this. Can the council also choose the notification process outside of the legislation?
No, the council can't choose to notify someone unless the Test and Act requires them to notify it. It's a pretty well-trodden process under the RMA about what the test is for who's considered and what impacts on them reach the threshold for being notified. That decision itself can be and often has in the past been litigated, so it's pretty well established what that test is under the RMA. It'll change under the planning bill, so I'm sure there'll be some new court cases needed to round out the edges, but there's very little flexibility, and where the council does make a decision, it's still liable to be challenged in court, and then it'll go like I say, it's become pretty predictable, I think, what will happen in what situations. There's no flexibility for the council at either a staff or elected member level.
Any more thoughts on whether we include something around the narrowing of the public notification, public's part of the process? I'm leaning towards including something, not saying we disagree with the proposed reform because it's such a key part of the reform, but I think it's important to make the point that, I won't repeat the points I've already made, but I would be keen to include something. I think the public would expect us to also make the point to the government, hey, you're there on behalf of us, make the point to the government that we want to have more of a say on consents that are happening in our area, not less, which is exactly where this reform is going. So, Tui.
Yeah, I definitely support that we include something along, a bit wider notification, not restricting it so far down that nobody gets to know. I mean, these are our ratepayers, they support us, and we're the ones imposing through government these rules, but they've got no say. That doesn't seem right. So definitely support notification.
Yeah, I think I'd be keen to be a bit broader about whether we say we think it should be wider, not narrower, which is directly the opposite of what they're proposing. But I think we do need to make some points around notification, so it might just be a bit of wordsmithing to land somewhere correctly, which we can do under the recommendation. So getting nods that will include something, but keep it pretty vague, but make the point that the public would be expecting. Yeah. Cool, Tony.
Not directly to that point in our recommendation here, but just picking up a further angle that Mr. Jackson spoke to, and that was the inability to speak to councillors through this period. And I'm making a comment at the risk of appearing somewhat ignorant as someone who perhaps should know more than most, exactly what the rules or recommendations are in relation to having that contact during processes such as consent applications. And I know we've had some training even recently on that. I think it would be very useful to have like a one-pager just spelling out when these processes are going on, might be plan changes, consent applications, hearings coming up, how we should handle those. Because I think that would be quite useful when we're talking to other people. We give a consistent message. And I'm making these comments because I've got to scratch my head and think about it myself on every occasion. Should I or not? So just a suggestion. If there's something there already, just happy to be referred to it.
Yeah, no, totally, I think, a relevant point to circulate something, or even do a half an hour workshop at the next opportunity around it, because it's an important one that always comes up, like Manor Park's also the live issue at the moment. The previous one was trickier with the election period. It is covered quite in depth in the making good decisions training as well, but not everyone has done that. But I think it's, for members not of this committee as well is just as important. As I think second only to the misconception that when property valuations change, our rates goes up. I think this is probably a close number two, that the council has an active role in resource consent decision-making and notification, which we absolutely don't. Cool. Any further thoughts on this?
Just on that further, I think, yeah, that's very helpful, and I think I need to do that training again. It's probably, I don't know, 15 years ago I did that training. I've forgotten most of it, showing my age. I think that kind of refresher would be important for myself, especially, I suppose. But the reason for saying that is it's a great pity if we err too much one way or another. If we err too much on communication and that undermines the process, that's a big issue. But if we don't take advantage of opportunities we could rightly have to engage with those who consider themselves affected, that's a pity as well.
100%. Cool. Any further thoughts about the submission? Awesome. Cool. Yep.
Just one question.
Yeah.
What is the best way to give some thoughts? I would like to take up the opportunity to give some thoughts on the submission itself, noting that it's due tomorrow.
Yeah, I was about to say very quickly, send an email with any proposed wording change. If it's tweaking here and there, we can pick it up under the recommendation that I can tweak the wording alongside the team. If it's something quite new or quite a departure from what's in there, then now's the opportunity to raise anything. Yeah, if it's just tweaking some stuff, then that email it through in the next 3 minutes would be okay. Stephen needs a break. Cool, awesome. Thank you so much, Stephen. And thank you for, I'm sure it was a very busy summer reading lots of lovely legislation from the government. So thank you for all your work over a busy summer period. Cool, so we've got the recommendations in front of us. Do you want to bring them up on the screen just for clarity?
Were we adding one about public consultation, or were you just
Yeah, I think because the question is, do we want to add another recommendation around the public notification bit? I'm comfortable with it being covered under recommendation 4, given we're going to be quite high level, not take a position on it. So as long as members are happy with that, yep, cool. So we've got options A, 3, in principle agree with the reform. Options B, 1, support the submission from GW and Taitura. Option C, 1, for stronger treaty clauses. And option D, 1, advocating for the retention of the tools. And option E, 2, support the compensation scheme while giving feedback. Cool. Sorry, I felt like I couldn't read there, but I was reading 3 screens. Cool, I'm happy to move those recommendations. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Puketapu, and he's got some thoughts as well.
Sorry, I'm just balancing between personal positioning and council positioning at the moment. Whether option 3, it's about the principle, but it's a partial agreement. I don't know how we word that, but there's sort of, because it's so black and white, but it's not. The reform is so complex. So how we can sort of potentially think about that notion of agreement, obviously knowing that there's some areas that we disagree with. So how we find that right balance, I don't know. The only word that's coming into mind at the moment is partial agree or agree with some. But I just have to note that.
Yeah, we'll try and fix that in the wording, I think, because it's the same thoughts I have around the compensation piece. Like, we kind of in principle support it. If all of these things were to fix, for me, it's the same here. Like, we support in principle as long as you retain all of these things, and then, yeah, we'd probably be comfortable with the end, but I'd hate for them just to read option 1 that we're in support and then kind of not read the rest of the stuff. So it's kind of, yeah, for me, making that really strong point, like, yeah, we kind of support it, but all these things would need to be fixed for us to actually support it. So yeah, we'll tweak the wording a little bit just to reinforce that these points aren't just nice to have, they're fundamental on our support, pinned on these changes. Cool. Councillor Stellinger.
Just wondering if even that recommendation could be tweaked a little bit, because things can be just plucked out of context. To say, to agree with the reforms subject to issues mentioned, the following issues being, the highlighted issues being addressed, words like that.
Yep, happy to add that in, noting like these are formal council recommendations, but they kind of are pinned to the actual report, which then pins to the actual wording. So
Yeah.
it's a bit disjointed, but the average human member of the public won't see that recommendation. So I think there's no harm in including that. Yep, thank you, Councillor Salinger. Richard, did you have some thoughts?
Just to support Councillor Pukitapu, I think on that A3, yeah, if we don't qualify it, we end up with looking like we support the reforms as a whole. I know in our submission we say that we agree that in principle there are some elements of the bill that need to be reformed, and then we go through the ones that we disagree with, I guess.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah, we'll definitely tidy that wording up in that opening section. Any further thoughts, or I'll put the recommendations? Great, cool. Well, we've got the recommendations in front of us. We've got a second to Councillor Pukitapu. Any further comment? No. All those in favour, please say aye. All opposed? I declare that carried. Cool. Moving on to item number 6, questions. I've received no questions. Moving on to item number 7, closing formalities. We'll bring these up onto the screen. Mea karakia tātou. Unuhia, unuhia, unuhia e te uru tapanui, kia wātia, kia māma, te nākau, te tinana, te wairua i te aratakatū. Koe rā I rongo, whakakairihi aki ki runga, kia wātia, ai rā, kua wātia, hau pai mārie. Kia ora everyone, thank you. I declare the